Dad gave every cousin cash and iPads, then told my daughter she wasn't family. So I cut off the money they lived on. My name is Mike. I'm 36 years old. And if you had told me a few years ago that I would be the one cutting my own parents off financially, I probably would have laughed and said you were being dramatic. Back then, family meant everything to me. I grew up believing loyalty and blood went hand in hand. I believed that no matter what disagreements we had, my parents would always treat me and my daughter fairly. I was wrong. What happened on my little girl's birthday was not just a slip, not just a thoughtless moment, and not just some awkward family mistake. It was a dagger shoved straight into my chest in front of everyone. My daughter Emily had just turned 7. She is the sweetest, kindest kid I have ever known. Yes, I am her dad, so of course I am biased, but everyone who meets her says the same thing. She is the type of child who draws extra birthday cards for classmates who might feel left out. She is the type who saves the biggest slice of cake for someone else. She is thoughtful in a way most adults I know are not. So when my parents showed up at her birthday party, I was genuinely hopeful. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time they would finally see how incredible she was. The party itself was small. We rented out a little play cafe with bright walls, balloons, simple decorations, and a cake Emily had picked out herself, covered in butterflies and soft pastel colors. She was bouncing with excitement, wearing this sparkly purple dress she had begged me to get for her. I wanted it to be her day, not some huge production, not some expensive performance, just something warm, special, and completely hers. When my parents walked in with my brother and sister trailing behind them, arms full of gift bags and shiny wrapping paper, I thought, maybe, just maybe, they were finally going to put effort into treating Emily the way they treated the other kids in the family. I watched as my dad pulled out envelopes, crisp white envelopes, thick envelopes, the kind I already knew were not just holding cards. One by one, he handed them out to my sister's kids and to my brother's kids. Their eyes lit up as they tore them open, pulling out stacks of bills and glossy brand new iPads still sealed in their shrink wrap. You could hear the cheers, the laughter, the ripping of packaging. My sister beamed, clapping her hands like her kids had just won the lottery. My brother leaned over to ruffle one of his son's hair and said, "Now you'll really be the coolest kid in school." Then my dad turned to my daughter. He did not pull out a bag. He did not hand her an envelope. He just smirked. This cruel, dismissive twitch of a smile spread across his face, and then he said, "She doesn't count as family." Time froze. It felt like every sound in the room had been sucked out at once. All I could hear was my own heartbeat slamming in my chest. Emily's little smile faltered. She looked from her grandfather to me, confusion filling her eyes. Her hands twisting together because she did not understand why she was not being given the same thing as the others. My mom looked away. Not a word of protest. Not even a whisper of shame. She just turned her head as if ignoring it made it disappear. My sister's kids shouted with excitement as they powered up their new tablets. My brother's kids waved their cash in the air like it was a game. And my daughter just stood there. Her sparkly purple dress suddenly felt too bright and too loud in the silence pressing around us. Then she whispered, "Dad, did I do something wrong?" That broke me completely. I felt anger rise in my throat, hot and bitter. But I did not let it out. Not there, not in front of her. Instead, I knelt down, looked her right in the eyes, and told her the only truth I could manage without falling apart. "No, sweetheart, you're perfect. You did nothing wrong." Then I stood up, grabbed her little hand in mine, and without another word, I walked out of that party. I walked past the shocked faces, past my mother's lowered eyes, past my father's smug little smirk that told me he thought he had won whatever twisted game he was playing. Emily's tiny fingers clutched mine as we stepped into the cool air outside. On the drive home, she sat quietly, staring out the window, her cake untouched in the box on the seat between us. I kept replaying it in my head, the way my dad said it so casually, like she was less, like she did not matter. Like my daughter, my whole world, was some outsider standing in a room full of people who should have loved her. And then I realized something that hit me like a freight train. I had been funding their lifestyle for years. The house my parents lived in, I had been paying their mortgage. The SUV my mom drove. That lease was in my name. Their credit cards. I had been covering those too, because every time they came crying about hard times, I told myself I was helping family. But what kind of family treats your child like she is invisible? That night, as Emily slept curled up with her stuffed bunny, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the glow of the screen reflecting off my clenched jaw. I pulled up every account, every automatic payment, every lease agreement, and I started making calls. I was not yelling. I was not even shaking. I was calm. Too calm. Methodical. My parents had shown me exactly what my daughter meant to them. Now, it was my turn to show them what they meant to me. And when the first text messages came in the next morning, panicked, confused, demanding to know why their cards were not working at the grocery store, why the SUV would not start, why the mortgage company had called, I did not answer. I just poured myself a cup of coffee, sat back, and thought, maybe now they would understand what it felt like to be told, you did not count. But that was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop. At first, I thought it was just spam calls or work notifications piling up overnight. But when I rolled over and squinted at the screen, I saw my mother's name lighting up again and again. Missed call after missed call. Dozens of texts stacked one after another. Mike, something's wrong with the card. Did you change something with the SUV? It won't start. The bank says the mortgage hasn't cleared. What's going on? I stared at the messages for a long moment, while my coffee brewed in the background, the rich smell filling my kitchen. It was surreal. For years, I had been the safety net, the quiet fixer. Every time my parents overspent, every time my brother took out another loan he could not pay back, every time my sister forgot to make a bill payment, it was me they leaned on. I never questioned it too hard. They called it just temporary help, or just until things get better. Somehow. It always became permanent. And now, with one night of cutting the cord, their world had cracked. I did not reply. Not yet. Instead, I watched Emily pour cereal into her bowl, humming softly to herself as if nothing had happened. She was too young to fully grasp the cruelty of the day before, but I could see the shadow of it in the way she hesitated before asking, "Daddy, are Grandma and Grandpa mad at me?" My heart tightened. I reached across the table, brushed a strand of hair from her face and said, "No, sweetheart, they're just figuring out some things. But listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. You're the best part of this family. Never forget that." By the time I dropped her off at school, my phone was a war zone. My father had finally chimed in. His texts were short and sharp. "Answer me. This isn't funny. You don't get to make decisions like this without consulting us." Consulting us. Like I had not been the one carrying them financially for years. Like they were the ones in charge, and I was still some kid living under their roof. I silenced the phone and went to work. But the silence did not last. By noon, my brother called. Unlike my parents, he did not bother with pleasantries. "What did you do?" he snapped as soon as I picked up. I could hear kids yelling in the background, probably his own children arguing over their new iPads. "I don't know what you mean," I said, sipping my coffee calmly. "Don't play dumb, Mike," he spat. "Mom's crying, Dad's furious. Their cards are getting declined left and right. And the SUV, what did you do to it? Did you seriously cancel everything overnight?" I let a beat of silence pass. I didn't cancel anything that wasn't in my name. He cursed under his breath, then lowered his voice as if he did not want his wife to hear. "You can't just pull the rug out like this. They depend on you. We depend on you. You know Dad's business dried up years ago. Without you, they're drowning." I leaned back in my chair. Funny, yesterday Dad didn't seem too concerned about who counts as family. I guess now he's realizing how much being part of the family really matters. There was silence on the other end. Then he barked, "Don't drag your kid into this. This is between you and them." I laughed, though there was no humor in it. That's exactly the point. He dragged her into it. He made her feel like she didn't belong, like she wasn't family. And all of you sat there and let it happen. So now you can deal with the fallout. My brother tried to argue more, but I hung up before he could. That afternoon, my mom showed up at my house. I saw her through the window before she even knocked, standing on the porch, wringing her hands like she was the victim in all of this. When I opened the door, she tried to brush past me into the living room, but I blocked her. "Mike," she said, her voice high and breathless. "You can't just do this. Your father is humiliated. We tried to get groceries this morning and the card declined at checkout. Do you know how embarrassing that was?" "Not nearly as embarrassing as telling a 7-year-old she doesn't count as family," I shot back. She flinched, but she did not apologize. Instead, she pivoted. "He didn't mean it that way. You know how your father is. He speaks without thinking. He was just joking." "A joke?" I repeated, my voice flat. "You really think that was a joke?" She pressed her lips together, then sighed dramatically. "Mike, you've always been so sensitive. We've always done what we could for you. Now that you're successful, it's your turn to support the family. That's how it works. Your father provided for you, and now you provide for us." That stung not because it was true, but because it was the story they had been feeding me my whole life. My dad had not really provided. He had scraped by, cut corners, and leaned on me the moment I started earning. But they had built this narrative that I owed them, that every check I wrote and every payment I covered was some kind of debt repayment for being born. I stepped outside onto the porch, closing the door behind me so Emily would not overhear. "Mom, listen carefully. I'm not sensitive. I'm a father, protecting my daughter. And if you think I'm going to let her grow up believing she's less than her cousins because of you, you're wrong. Yesterday was the line. Dad crossed it, and you let him. I'm done." Her eyes welled up with tears, but they were not the kind of tears that come from guilt. They were manipulative, the same kind she used when she wanted to tug at my sympathy. "Mike, if you cut us off, we'll lose everything. The house, the car. What will people think? Do you want that on your conscience?" I almost laughed again. Funny how you worry about what people think, but not about what your granddaughter feels. That tells me everything I need to know. She sputtered and tried to say more, but I walked back inside and closed the door gently in her face. For the first time in years, I felt a strange calm settle over me. But the calm did not last long. The family group chat exploded that evening. Messages flew back and forth. My sister demanded to know how I could ruin Mom and Dad's lives like this. My brother insisted I was overreacting. My dad finally joined in with one cold, clipped line. "You've embarrassed this family enough. Fix what you broke." Fix what I broke. As if the brokenness had not been there long before I cut off the money. And then came the kicker. My sister sent a photo into the group chat. Her kids were holding up their iPads, smiling wide with the caption, "At least some of us appreciate what Dad does for us. Too bad your daughter couldn't handle being left out for once." My hands tightened around the phone so hard I thought the screen would crack. Emily was sitting on the couch nearby, drawing quietly in her sketchbook, unaware of the digital war raging around her. I looked at her, my little girl, so innocent, so undeserving of the cruelty, and I knew this was far from over. They were not just entitled, they were escalating, and if I thought walking away at the party was the end of it, I was wrong. This was only the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of tension and thinly veiled hostility. I had expected anger from my father, guilt-tripping from my mother, and constant pestering from my siblings. But what I did not expect was how far they were willing to go to prove a point. By the end of that week, I realized this was not just about money. It was about control. It was about them reminding me that no matter how old I was, no matter what I built, I was still expected to play the role they assigned me. The provider, the fixer, the one who sacrificed while they indulged. At first, their retaliation was small, but deliberate. My sister posted passive-aggressive photos on social media of her kids playing with their new iPads. All smiles, with captions like, "Family is everything, period." The irony was so thick it nearly made me choke. My brother started parroting the same lines in the group chat, hinting that maybe I was unstable or losing touch because I dared to step back. They were not directly confronting me anymore. They were trying to paint me as the problem, the black sheep. But the real turning point came the following weekend. Emily had a recital at her school. She had been practicing for weeks every evening in her room, plucking away at her little violin with this determined frown that always melted into a proud grin when she finally got a piece right. I promised her I would be there, front row, cheering her on, no matter what. For her, this was the event of the season. When we arrived, the school auditorium was buzzing with parents, siblings, and grandparents shuffling into their seats. Emily clutched her violin case like it was made of glass, bouncing nervously on her toes as we waited. I spotted my parents across the room, sitting with my sister and brother's families. I had not expected them to show up. After everything, I thought maybe they would stay away out of pride. But no, they were there, loud as ever, laughing and greeting other parents as if nothing had happened at all. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe they had come to support Emily. Maybe they had finally realized what they had done and wanted to make it right. But that naive hope did not last long. When Emily's group took the stage, I watched her scan the crowd, her eyes searching for familiar faces. When she spotted me, her shoulders relaxed, and she gave a tiny wave. I waved back, my chest swelling with pride. But then her eyes drifted to the other side of the auditorium, toward my parents, my sister, and my brother. That was when it happened. My dad leaned over to my sister, whispered something, and suddenly they all started laughing. Not the kind of laughter that bubbles up naturally, but sharp, deliberate, and cruel. And as Emily lifted her bow to the strings, my father cupped his hands around his mouth and said loud enough for the nearby rows to hear, "Hope she doesn't squeak like last time." The words sliced through the silence of the auditorium like a knife. A few parents glanced around frowning, but my family just smirked and pretended it was harmless fun. My daughter froze. Her little hands trembled on the bow, and I could see panic flooding her face. She squeaked. Not once, not twice, but the whole way through. Every note fractured. Every rhythm fell apart. She tried to keep going, but tears welled up in her eyes, and by the end of the song, her chin was quivering. The applause came anyway because parents always clap for kids, but it was scattered and hesitant because everyone had heard the remark. Everyone had seen the way my daughter crumbled under it. I wanted to storm across that auditorium, grab my father by the collar, and drag him out. But I did not. Not then. I forced myself to stay seated because Emily needed to see me calm. She needed to know I was not shaken, even if I was burning inside. After the recital, she walked off stage, her violin dangling limply at her side. She did not run into my arms the way she usually did. Instead, she whispered, "Daddy, why did Grandpa say that? Why would he laugh at me?" I crouched down, fighting to keep my voice steady. Because some people don't know how to be kind, sweetheart. But you were brave up there, and that's what matters. Behind us, I could hear my family gathering their things, laughing as if they had not just humiliated a child. My sister's voice carried above the crowd. "Well, I guess she's not going to Juilliard anytime soon." More laughter. My mom did not stop them. She did not even look ashamed. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I had tolerated years of manipulation, years of being used like an ATM, years of being dismissed. But now it was not just me. They had come after Emily intentionally in public and broken something pure inside her. It was not favoritism anymore. It was not passive neglect. It was cruelty. Deliberate, targeted cruelty. On the ride home, Emily sat silently in the back seat, her violin untouched beside her. Normally, she would chatter all the way home, dissecting every detail of her performance, laughing about little mistakes, asking if I thought she did well. But that night, she just stared out the window, her reflection pale against the dark glass. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles whitened. My thoughts raced. Memories of every time they had cut me down. Every time they told me I owed them. Every time they treated my daughter like she was less. And I realized with absolute clarity that I could not just cut them off financially. That was too easy for them to work around. No, I needed to take back something bigger, something they would never expect. But before I even had the chance to formulate a plan, the betrayal deepened. The next morning, I found out my father had been talking to Emily's teacher. He had innocently pulled her aside after the recital and told her that Emily was sensitive and not really cut out for music. He suggested she be placed in less demanding activities. The teacher, bless her, called me directly and told me about it because she thought it was strange and inappropriate. She reassured me that she would not take his words seriously, but hearing it nearly made me sick. He was not just humiliating her publicly, he was trying to sabotage her privately. And when I confronted him about it, he did not even deny it. He just shrugged over the phone and said, "Better she learns now than wastes everyone's time later." That was it. That was the breaking point, the emotional turning point I could not come back from. I looked at my daughter that night, curled up in bed, her violin case tucked under the covers like she was trying to protect it from the world. And I made a silent promise. Whatever it took, however long it took, they would never hurt her like this again. And when I was done, they would regret ever thinking she did not count. After the recital and that phone call from Emily's teacher, something inside me shifted. Up until that point, I had been angry, furious even. But I still held on to this thread of disbelief. I kept thinking maybe they would come to their senses, maybe they would apologize. Maybe deep down they just did not realize how much damage they were causing. But when I realized my father had gone out of his way to try to sabotage Emily's music, it was like a curtain dropped. That thin, fragile hope I had about reconciliation was gone. I did not sleep much that week. Nights stretched into hours of staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying everything over and over. The look on Emily's face at her birthday party, the tears in her eyes on stage, the smug smirk my father wore while dismissing her as not family. Each memory cut deeper, not because of what it meant for me, but because of what it was doing to my daughter. I started noticing changes in her, too. She was quieter, less bubbly. Her violin sat untouched in its case for days, and when I gently asked if she wanted to practice, she shook her head and mumbled, "Maybe later." Later never came. It broke me to see her light dim like that. Emily had always been this vibrant, glowing presence in my life. Her laughter could fill a room. Her imagination could turn an empty living room into a castle. Now it was like someone had poured water over that flame, leaving only smoke. And I knew exactly who had struck the match. At work, I found myself staring blankly at my computer screen, my mind wandering. My coworkers probably thought I was just tired, but the truth was, I was unraveling inside. I had spent years bending over backward to keep my family afloat, convincing myself it was what good sons did. And in return, they treated the one person who mattered most to me as disposable. It was not just cruel. It was a betrayal of everything family was supposed to mean. The text did not stop either. My father would alternate between icy silence and harsh demands. Restore the payments, enough games. Then, a day later, "You'll regret this if you don't fix it." My mother leaned on guilt, sending long messages about how family was not perfect, how we all made mistakes, and how I should not punish them over one little comment. She never mentioned the recital. She never mentioned the teacher. She never mentioned the deliberate cruelty. It was always framed like I was the one overreacting, like I was the one tearing the family apart. My sister and brother chimed in too. "You're embarrassing everyone. Don't make your daughter the center of your tantrums. Think about mom and dad's reputation." I did not reply to any of them. Not once. But their voices lingered echoing in my head when the house grew quiet at night. I would pace the kitchen, a glass of water in my hand that I barely remembered pouring, and wonder how I got here. How had I allowed myself to become so entangled, so obligated, that cutting them off felt like sawing off a limb? How had I spent years financing people who could not even muster the decency to clap for my daughter? It was in those long, restless nights that the grief hit hardest. Because it was grief. I was grieving the parents I thought I had, the family I thought existed. I realized I had been clinging to an illusion, some childhood belief, that if I just gave enough, they would love me enough in return. But they did not. Not me, and certainly not Emily. The hardest moment came one evening, when Emily padded into the living room, dragging her violin behind her like it was too heavy to carry. She plopped onto the couch next to me and rested her head against my arm. "Daddy," she whispered, "do you think I should stop playing?" My throat tightened. "Why would you say that?" She shrugged her little shoulders, rising and falling. "Grandpa said I'm not good. and I don't want to mess up again." Everyone laughed. I pulled her into my arms, holding her so tightly that she squirmed. "Sweetheart, listen to me. You are good. You're better than good. You're brave. You went up on that stage and you played even when you were scared. That's what makes you amazing, not whether every note was perfect." She was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "But what if I'm not family enough?" That nearly shattered me. I pressed my forehead against hers and said, "You are my family. You're my whole world. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." When she fell asleep in my arms, I carried her to bed and sat by her side for a long time, watching her chest rise and fall. That was when the planning began. Not in some dramatic flash of inspiration, but in small, deliberate thoughts that built slowly. I could not just cut them off and hope they faded away. They were too entitled, too stubborn. They would claw their way back into our lives, always finding new ways to hurt her. No, I needed to make sure Emily and I were untouchable. That meant reevaluating everything. My finances, my will, my home. It meant drawing lines so deep in the sand that they could not be crossed. I started quietly. I met with a lawyer under the pretense of updating some routine paperwork. But what I really wanted was to set protections in place. I asked about trusts, about guardianship, about how to make sure Emily's future was locked away where my family could not reach it. I did not tell anyone, not even close friends, because I knew that if word got out, my family would twist it into more ammunition. I also started pulling back socially. I stopped going to extended family dinners. I stopped answering phone calls. I stopped showing up at events I would normally feel obligated to attend. The excuses were easy. Work was busy. Emily had school. We had other plans. It did not take long for the whispers to start. My sister posted online about how some people think they are too good for their own family, clearly aimed at me. My brother dropped hints in the group chat about me isolating Emily. My mom even sent a long, dramatic message to everyone, talking about how I was turning my child against her grandparents. The irony was almost laughable. They had done that all by themselves. But isolation has a cost. As I pulled away, the loneliness crept in. Nights felt heavier, quieter. Even with Emily's laughter still filling the house, sometimes I felt the absence of something I used to think was permanent. It is a strange kind of pain, mourning people who are still alive. Still, beneath the grief, something steady was growing. Resolve. I could not change who they were. I could not make them see Emily's worth. But I could make sure she grew up never doubting it herself. And I could make sure my family learned that actions had consequences. Consequences they could not buy their way out of with cash-stuffed envelopes or shiny new gadgets. By the time the month turned over, their calls had grown more desperate. My father even showed up at my office one afternoon, waiting outside the building like some storm cloud ready to burst. I slipped out the back before he could corner me. I was not ready yet. Not for the confrontation, not for the explosion I knew was coming. But deep down, I could feel it building. I was nearing a breaking point. And when it came, there would be no going back. When you hit rock bottom, you either stay there and let the weight crush you, or you find something inside yourself you did not know was there and start climbing. For a while, I did not know which one I would be. I would wake up, make Emily breakfast, take her to school, sit at my desk at work and go through the motions, like a man underwater. Slow, heavy, muffled. But little by little, cracks of light started breaking through. The first shift came from Emily herself. One afternoon, I came home from work and found her in the living room with her violin out again. She was not playing anything serious, just plucking at the strings, making silly noises, and laughing at how squeaky it sounded. But it was the first time since the recital that she had touched it. I leaned against the doorway, watching her experiment, her giggles filling the room, and I realized something. She was resilient, stronger than I had given her credit for. They had tried to crush her, and while she had bent under the weight, she had not broken. That lit something in me. I started leaning into my work again. For years, I had built my career in finance quietly, not broadcasting it to my family, because I did not want to feed their entitlement. I owned a growing consulting firm, steady clients, good contracts, nothing flashy, but now I doubled down. I began chasing bigger accounts, investing more time into hiring sharp people, expanding into areas I had been too cautious to touch before. Every extra hour I poured into the business was not just about me. It was about Emily's future. It was about building something so solid and untouchable that no one, not even my parents, could claim a piece of it. And success came quickly once I shifted gears. The firm landed a massive deal with a tech company that had been circling us for months. That one contract alone doubled our revenue for the quarter. I reinvested immediately, opening a new office in a neighboring city. For the first time in a long while, I felt momentum pulling me forward instead of dragging me down. With that momentum came power. Financial power, yes, but emotional power too. The more I grew, the less my family's absence felt like a wound, and the more it felt like freedom. I did not need their approval anymore. I did not need their validation. I was proving to myself day after day that I could thrive without them. It was not just about work, though. I threw myself into Emily's world too. If my family was not going to celebrate her, I would. I signed her up for art classes, painting clay, anything that let her creativity out. I took her to a music shop and let her pick out new strings for her violin, telling her it was an upgrade for a real musician. Slowly, her spark started coming back. She would run up to me after class, proudly showing me messy paintings of butterflies or lopsided clay animals, her face glowing. One night, I found her asleep at her desk with sheet music under her cheek. It was a simple lullaby she was trying to master. I tucked her into bed and sat staring at that music for a long time. That tiny piece of paper, with crooked notes penciled in by her small hand, meant more than any check I had ever written for my parents. Meanwhile, my family's decline was visible from a distance. My brother had to sell his car after failing to make payments. My sister posted cryptic rants online about fake people who abandoned their families. My parents' house, once meticulously maintained, started showing signs of neglect. The lawn grew over. The shutters peeled. Word trickled back to me through mutual acquaintances. They were struggling, and yet they still tried to spin the story. In the group chat, they claimed I was the selfish one, that I was flaunting my success while letting them rot. My father even sent a message one night saying, "You wouldn't have anything if not for me. Remember who raised you." I did not reply. Instead, I focused on something that would make them irrelevant. I met again with my lawyer, expanding the plans I had begun during my lowest point. We structured a trust for Emily that secured every dollar I earned for her future. We built clauses that locked out any claim from relatives. My lawyer even chuckled at how ironclad I wanted it. "Mike," he said, "you're essentially building a fortress around her inheritance. They won't be able to touch a cent." That's the point, I told him. At the same time, I began making subtle moves at work that gave me influence in circles my family could not even dream of reaching. Networking dinners, charity events, local sponsorships. I was shaking hands with CEOs, donors, and people who carried weight in the community. And with every connection I built, my parents' relevance shrank further. I was not just distancing myself, I was outgrowing them entirely. But here is the thing about growth. It does not erase the scars. As much as life was improving, the hurt lingered. There were nights when I would pour a drink and sit in silence, thinking about how it could have been different. If my father had just clapped at that recital, if my mother had just said, "She's family," if my siblings had just once stood up for Emily, maybe things would not have gone this far. But they did not. And every success I stacked up only reminded me of what they had thrown away. Emily noticed the change too. She would crawl into my lap sometimes and say, "Daddy, you smile more now." That broke me in a different way, because she was right. I was smiling more. Not because the pain was gone, but because I finally felt like I was steering our lives instead of being yanked around by guilt. One Saturday, I took her to the park, and while she ran ahead chasing bubbles with other kids, I sat on a bench and let the sun warm my face. For the first time in months, I felt light. I realized that no matter what storm my family tried to throw at me, I was stronger now. Emily was stronger. And together, we were building something better than the mess I came from. Of course, peace never lasts long. My family was not done. They could not accept that I was rising while they sank. The more they struggled, the more desperate they became. And desperate people make reckless choices. I did not know it yet, but the real battle was only beginning. By the time spring rolled around, I had settled into a rhythm. Work was booming, Emily was laughing again, and I had built a kind of invisible wall between us and the rest of my family. They were still trying, of course, still texting, still leaving voicemails, still posting their not-so-subtle digs on social media, but they were no longer getting through, at least not directly. Still, I could not shake the gnawing thought that this was not over. My parents were not the type to slink away quietly. They thrived on control, on appearances, and on other people's money. Without me funding their lives, they were cornered animals. And cornered animals lash out. It was during this uneasy calm that something unexpected fell into my lap. One afternoon, my business partner forwarded me an email from a regional bank we sometimes dealt with. It was routine, just some financial statements, but attached at the bottom, I noticed a familiar name, my father's. Apparently, he had been applying for a line of credit and had listed me as a guarantor, without my consent. I stared at the document in disbelief. It had my name, my address, even my business listed. He had forged my information. My blood ran cold as I scrolled through the details. Not only had he tried to leverage my financial credibility, but he had also grossly exaggerated his own assets, claiming ownership of things I knew for a fact he did not have anymore. For years, I had quietly bailed them out of messes like this. I would write the checks, smooth it over, and let them off the hook. But this time, I was not bailing them out. This time, I saved the email, forwarded it to my lawyer, and began a different kind of planning. When I met with my lawyer later that week, he whistled low as he read through the file. "Mike, this isn't just desperate, this is fraud. If the bank pushes, your father could be in very real legal trouble." I leaned back in my chair. Good. He looked at me over his glasses, eyebrows raised. "You're not planning to bail him out?" "No," I said firmly. "Not this time. Not ever again." We sat in silence for a moment before he asked, "Do you want to pursue this?" I did not answer right away. Part of me wanted to throw the whole thing back in my father's face, show him the proof and watch him squirm. But another part of me wanted patience. I had leverage now, and leverage is worth more when you let it ripen. That was the seed of my plan. Over the next few weeks, I started pulling threads quietly and carefully. I spoke with contacts in the business community, the same people I had been shaking hands with at dinners and charity events. It turned out my father's name had come up before. He had a reputation in certain circles, someone who once had money but was now notorious for bad debts and borrowing against connections. The more I listened, the clearer the picture became. He was not just struggling financially, he was on the brink of losing everything. And my mother, I learned that she had been bragging in her book club for years about how generous her son was, painting a picture of me as their lifelong safety net. Some of the women in that group quietly reached out to me. One even apologized, saying, "We always thought you didn't mind the way she told it." That infuriated me, but it also gave me more fuel. I was not going to let their narrative stand unchallenged forever. Then there was my brother. He had gotten into real estate investments a few years back, riding the market while it was hot. Now, with the downturn, he was drowning in debt. Rumor had it he was behind on multiple mortgages. My sister was not any better. She had tried to start some boutique mom business selling overpriced candles and home decor, but it had flopped spectacularly. She was living off credit cards and her husband's paycheck. One by one, the pillars of their entitlement were crumbling. And here I was, in the strongest position of my life. At home, I started preparing Emily too. Not in a direct way, but in little lessons. I taught her about saving, about the difference between needs and wants, about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who lift you up instead of drag you down. I never mentioned her grandparents directly, but I saw the way her eyes sharpened when she listened. She understood more than I gave her credit for. The turning point came when I was invited to a local gala. It was a charity fundraiser for children's arts programs fitting, given Emily's love for music. I decided to attend partly to show support and partly to continue building connections. That night, as I stood in the ballroom surrounded by business leaders, I realized just how far I had come. I was not the quiet son in the shadow of his parents anymore. I was a man who could stand on his own, command respect, and build a future without anyone's permission. And then fate handed me another weapon. At the gala, I bumped into an old acquaintance who happened to work in municipal planning. We chatted casually, and he mentioned, almost in passing, that there was a new development project being reviewed, one that just so happened to border the neighborhood where my parents lived. He joked about how property taxes there were about to skyrocket if the project went through. That nugget stuck with me. My parents were already struggling to pay their bills. If taxes rose significantly, they would be in even deeper trouble. And I had the resources not only to weather it, but to benefit from it. If I positioned myself right, I could end up owning property in that very area, maybe even theirs, without lifting a finger to take it. The market would do it for me. For weeks, I played it cool. I gathered documents, I kept the fraudulent bank application tucked away. I built my contacts. I expanded the trust I had set up for Emily. Every move I made was quiet, deliberate, surgical. My family had no idea how far ahead I was setting the chessboard. They still thought they could bully me back into submission with guilt and insults. They had no clue I was about to turn the board upside down. It was around this time that my mother tried a new tactic. She showed up at Emily's school unannounced. I got a call from the front office telling me that Grandma had stopped by with cookies for the kids. When I arrived, my mom was in the lobby, beaming like nothing had ever happened. Emily, on the other hand, stood stiffly beside her, looking uncomfortable. "Mike," my mom said brightly, as if we were in the middle of some happy reunion. "I thought I'd surprise Emmy." I took Emily's hand and looked my mother dead in the eye. "Don't ever come here unannounced again." Her smile faltered. "Oh, don't be dramatic. I'm her grandmother. I have every right to see her." "No," I said flatly. "You don't. Not anymore." The silence that followed was thick. Emily squeezed my hand, and for the first time I saw her look at her grandmother, not with confusion or longing, but with a kind of quiet resolve. That was the moment I knew I was not just protecting her anymore. I was teaching her how to protect herself. And while my family thought they were still playing the same old game, I was already 3 moves ahead, because soon, very soon, I was going to use everything I had learned, the forged documents, the financial instability, the community connections, and even the rising property taxes, to make sure they understood exactly what it meant when I said, Emily and I did not count on them anymore. They always say things have a way of coming back around. They just never meant that it would hit them through me. I had spent months laying the groundwork, legal locks around Emily's future, quiet conversations with people who owed me favors, learning the slow language of municipal politics, collecting proof. The forged bank document was the first domino. Once I handed that file to my lawyer, the bank's fraud department did what banks do when you hand them a smoking gun. They opened a formal investigation, froze the questionable applications, and started asking very uncomfortable questions. My father called me a coward for not fixing it, like I owed him the privilege of bailing him out of his own lies. I did not answer. But legal trouble was only half the equation. The other half was leverage. I had cultivated that piece by patient piece. There were the property rumors I had quietly confirmed at the gala, the development that would upend the neighborhood, the tax reassessments that were likely to follow. There were the names of the contractors and the purchasing agents who would move first. There was the quiet account of my brother's failed investments. His mortgage is fragile enough that one sudden tax spike would make them collapse like a house of cards. I did not start the market forces. No, I simply positioned myself so that when the market moved, I could steer the consequences in ways that exposed more than just balances and ledgers. Early on a Tuesday, the dominoes started to fall. It began small and ordinary. My sister's social feed lit up with the usual smiling family photos. Only this time, one of the photos had an unexpected caption. A mutual friend from the school committee, someone who had heard the story through the fundraiser circuit, reposted an old picture of my parents with the line, "Funny how some families demand gratitude while treating others like dirt." The comment thread filled with questions. People I had met at work, neighbors, even a few of the women from my mother's book club who had privately sent me apologies. Suddenly, they were public. My sister reacted the way entitled people do, defensively, with outrage and conspiracy theories. But outrage does not explain away screenshots or bank records when they are laid out in order. Then came the bank. They called my father in for questioning about the guarantee. Their inquiries were not secret. The bank's legal team made sure there was a paper trail. For the first time since I had been paying the mortgage and the SUV lease, he had to sit across from strangers and explain why I was listed as a guarantor on loan documents he had no right to attach my name to. He fumbled. He lied. When the bank threatened to refer the case to the district attorney, his voice went small. There are few things more humiliating to someone who built a life around machismo than realizing it is not bluster that protects you. It is paper signatures and truth. At the same time, my brother's lender called him in about an accelerating default. A tax reassessment, followed by a home insurance reevaluation, had pushed his payments into arrears. My brother's pride had kept him from asking me for help. He had always loved the drama of outspending his means, but pride cannot pay a mortgage when the math changes overnight. He sold the nicer of his cars in a panic and started floating messages about tough times on social media. The kind of thinly veiled pleas that used to come straight to my phone with begging eyes and just until next month. Not this time. And then came the most delicious little stroke of all, the SUV. I had canceled the lease months ago and put the car back into a holding account so the leasing company could take whatever action they needed to take. I made sure every return notice was legally spotless, no grounds for complaint. Late one afternoon, I got a forwarded text from a cousin I had not spoken to in years. It was a photo of the SUV being towed away from the grocery store parking lot. My mother's face was red and furious in the reflection of the rear window. The tow operator looked bored and professional. The caption read, "When you spend like it's 2010, but live like it's 1995. The image traveled faster than any family group chat argument ever had. I did not dance on graves. I am not some cartoon villain. But there was a small, private warmth in watching the consequences of their choices land where they belonged. For years, they had weaponized shame against me. They had used the idea of what people will think to keep me paying, to keep me quiet, to keep my daughter in her place. Now the public questions and the very visible unpaid balances were the things keeping them up at night. I had moved them out from behind their closed doors and into the light where their behavior could not be smoothed over by excuses or manipulation. Still, I kept my move surgical. When the bank's investigator called to ask if I wanted to file a criminal complaint for identity fraud, my lawyer and I discussed it like two chess players analyzing lines. It would take months, possibly longer, and it would shred their credit in a way that could cascade into forced sales and bankruptcies. It would humiliate them in court. It would also inevitably drag Emily into public family turmoil. I thought about that. Then I thought about the recital, the birthday party, and the way my father had smiled, as if he were the one in the right. I made the decision. We filed. That evening, the district attorney's office sent a letter acknowledging receipt of the complaint and requesting cooperation in their preliminary inquiry. The letter arrived in a plain white envelope, but the effect it had on our lives was anything but plain. My mother called me in a panic, her voice high and accusing. "This is a witch hunt," she said. "You're going to ruin us." My brother texted me a string of capital letters and exclamation points. My sister resorted to passive-aggressive posts about how families should stick together. Each response only tightened my resolve. I had expected backlash. I had anticipated the family chant of, "How could you?" I had anticipated the attempts to shame me into rolling everything back, but I had not expected the community to tilt. The PTA emails started to include awkward silence when my mother tried to book the bake sale table. Invitations stopped arriving. People in our neighborhood, the same ones who used to chuckle and nod at their generosity, began to edge away. That hurt them more than being denied cash. They were social animals, and social standing was their oxygen. While the legal process unfolded, I executed another layer of the plan. I used my LLC to buy a small parcel of property 2 streets over from my parents' house, a vacant lot that the development I had heard about would soon make valuable. I did not buy it to gloat. I bought it because in a few months, when rezoning and taxes took their course, I wanted to be in a position to make a fair market offer that the bank or an auctioneer would accept. In the worst-case scenario, I could be the purchaser at a trustee sale. Owning the lot would be a move in the same game they had tried to play with me, only I was playing by the rules, and I was playing brilliantly. There were procedural satisfactions along the way. Formal letters from lawyers, terse phone calls from people I had once done favors for, politely declining further contact with them. The quiet snubbing of my parents at community events. But the thing that put the most salt in the wound was not the legal paperwork, the auctions, or the repossessions. It was the shift in the way Emily held herself. She watched as this house of cards shook and fell around them. And instead of crumbling again like she had at the recital, she stood straighter. She asked me questions fewer about revenge and more about fairness and strength. Why do people treat some kids differently? She would ask over cereal. Because sometimes people are small inside, I would tell her. And when they are small, they try to make other people feel small too. But you're not small, Em. You never were. She would smile. And the light in her eyes came back, in flashes that warmed something in me that had been raw for a long time. Then the final piece fell into place, the one I had been building toward without telling anyone. The bank, unsettled by the fraud and nervous about potential liability, chose to foreclose on the smallest of the outstanding properties tied to my father's name. It was not the house he had always boasted about. It was a rental he had used as collateral on a line of credit. The auction notice went out publicly, posted in the legal section of the paper, and my legal team confirmed the date. I could have let it go to auction and stood back watching them scramble. I could have let the market take them and quietly purchased the property later. But there is an art to vengeance, timing, theater, precision. And the thought of simply being the anonymous buyer felt anticlimactic. What I wanted was for them to understand finally and fully the cost of their choices. I wanted a moment where they looked up from the rubble of their lives and saw me standing there calm, composed, and unbothered. I wanted the look on my father's face when he realized his prying hands had been swapped for a closed door. So I arranged a small thing. I told my lawyer I wanted to be present at the auction under an assumed company name. I had the cashier's check ready. I had the LLC paperwork prepared to transfer the deed. I told Emily only that we were going to see how auctions worked. No fanfare, no talk of revenge. Only a quiet lesson in markets and consequences. On the morning of the sale, I woke earlier than usual. The air had that clean, electric quality of a day when something irreversible is about to happen. I tucked Emily's hand into mine and drove past our old neighborhood toward the municipal building where trustee sales were held. People milled around, mostly strangers, some curious neighbors. My parents were not there yet. They had been scrambling, calling every relative they could, in hopes someone would bail them out at the last minute. Pride can make you slow to act, and shame can make you slow to ask. I checked my phone, a message from my sister. "Where are you?" A string of frantic posts from my mother, pleading, begging, promises to change, had started sprinkling across social media. The kind of desperate performance they thought would sway me. It would not. I felt a small, private compassion for them. They were panicking in the only language they knew. Inside the room, the bids began. The auctioneer called the numbers in that sing-song cadence that makes property feel like a commodity rather than a home. I held the bid card with an odd detachment, like someone watching a stage performance from the back row. The prices climbed. People shuffled pieces of paper. My heartbeat stayed steady. When the property was finally within reach, I raised my card just once. The gavel came down. The murmurs in the room shifted. I signed the paperwork. We transferred funds. It took mere minutes, dry and administrative, to make the purchase legally binding. But I knew what the ripple would look like. Statements to the credit bureaus, liens recorded. The bank's exposure finally visible on paper. I had done this with surgical calm. Then came the call I had been waiting for. My father's voice on the line was thin and cracked. "Mike," he said, as if addressing a stranger. "Please, we can fix this." "We can't." He could not finish. I listened to the corner of my mouth lifting in a way that felt unfamiliar and righteous. "I already fixed it," I said softly. "I bought the property today." I heard silence on the other end, and then the sputter of disbelief. "You can avoid a lot of pain if you leave Emily out of your life," I told him. "Walk away. Let us be." The thermostat of my conscience clicked. The words were blunt, but they were the truth. He begged. I stayed calm. I offered one last quiet olive branch. If they participated in family counseling and made a public apology acknowledging what they had done, I would consider unwinding some of the more public actions with counsel. It was a conditional offer, yes. Protection always is. But it was real leverage tied to real consequences. He said no. So I let the motion continue. As we drove back, Emily chattered about how auctions were kind of like a game, and I told her that sometimes people play hard and unfair, and sometimes you have to be willing to play better. The sun was bright, the car hummed, and a small, unbidden thought crossed my mind. This was working. The plan was unfolding exactly the way I had constructed it in the quiet hours. The legal complaints, the targeted purchases, the strategy of letting the market do half the work while my actions did the other half. We pulled into the driveway and my phone buzzed. It was my sister, a short message. "You're going to regret this." I read it, then looked down at Emily, who had fallen asleep against the window, her violin case snug beside her like a sleeping animal. I was about to press send on a final email to my lawyer, one that would initiate the next phase, the public notice and the transfer of title, when my hand hesitated. There was another call buzzing, my father again. Beyond him, the slow, cooling voice of our town gossiping in the background on social media. I thought of the recital, of the birthday party, of my daughter's small, confused face asking why she was not enough. I opened the draft email, read the last clause I had written, the one that spelled out the terms of their last chance, and then stopped. I realized I was moments away from pulling a trigger that would change everything. Not just their lives, but our lives too, in a way that might be irreversible. I set the phone down. The sun fell across Emily's face. I thought of forgiveness, of silence, of the kind of person I wanted to be when all of it was done. Then I thought of my daughter's violin, under the blanket of the way she had found the courage to pick it up again, and I tightened my jaw. I hit send on the email. The rest had to be handled in person. I booked a time to meet with them at the community center, under the pretense of wanting to talk things through. I told no one the truth about what I had bought that morning. I wanted their reactions to be genuine, not manufactured by advanced knowledge. When the three of them walked into that fluorescent-lit room that afternoon, my mother clutching a tissue box like it was proof of performance, my father looking oddly smaller, and my sister glaring like someone used to being obeyed, I felt the weight of the moment settle like a held breath. I stood, and for the first time in years, I looked at them as if they were strangers. "Before we start," I said, reaching into my bag, "there's something you need to know." Then I showed them the deed. The look on their faces when I laid the deed on the table was worth more than every dollar I had spent, more than every sleepless night, more than every bitter text I had ignored. My father's jaw went slack. My mother's tissue froze halfway to her cheek. My sister actually laughed at first, until she saw the seal on the document. "You're lying," my father said. Finally, his voice low and shaky, like an old dog trying to bare its teeth one last time. I slid the paper toward them. "It's public record. You can look it up yourself." My sister snatched it, her eyes darting back and forth across the lines. Her face drained. "No, this can't be right. You wouldn't do this to us." "I didn't do this to you," I said evenly. "You did it to yourselves. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences." My mother let out this wailing sound, half anger, half grief. "We're your family, Mike. How could you humiliate us like this after everything we've done for you?" I laughed, then quietly shaking my head. "Everything you've done for me, like telling my daughter she doesn't count as family, like laughing while she cried on stage, like sabotaging her with her teacher. If that's what family is, I'd rather have none." My father tried to rally, pounding the table. "You owe us respect," he barked. I met his glare and did not flinch. Respect isn't owed, it's earned. And you lost mine the second you decided my child was disposable. The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time in my life, they had nothing to throw back. No threats, no guilt trips, no manipulative speeches. Just the crushing weight of their own ruin. My sister snapped first, slamming her hands on the table. "You'll regret this when people find out what you did." "They already know," I cut in. "You've made sure of that, with your own behavior. People aren't blind. They've seen the way you treat Emily. They've seen the way you twist every story. The only thing I've done is stop covering for you." Her face twisted, but no words came out. I stood then, slipping the deed back into my folder. "Here's how this goes. You stay away from me. You stay away from my daughter. If you can't manage that, the next papers you see won't be property deeds. They'll be subpoenas. Consider this your last warning." My father's eyes, once full of fire, now looked small, beaten. He muttered something under his breath, but I did not care to hear it. I turned to leave Emily's future tucked safely under my arm. As I walked out of that room, my mother called after me, her voice breaking. "You'll regret turning your back on us." I stopped in the doorway, looked back once, and said the only truth that mattered. "No, I regret not doing it sooner." Then I left them there, in the stale light of that community center, with nothing but the echo of their own failure. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread like cracks through glass. The bank pressed charges. Their reputation collapsed. The community that had once excused their arrogance turned cold. My brother sold off what little he had left. My sister's business dissolved. My parents' house, over-leveraged and drowning under back taxes, eventually went up for sale. I did not buy it. I did not need to. They had already lost the only thing that mattered: control. Meanwhile, Emily thrived. She picked up her violin again, slowly at first, then with the same joy she once had. At her next recital, she played with confidence, her bow steady, her chin lifted. When the applause came, she looked out into the audience and found me smiling back at her. Not my parents, not my siblings, just me. And that was enough. Afterward, she ran into my arms, breathless and beaming. "Did you hear, Daddy? I didn't squeak this time." I hugged her tight, the sound of her laughter filling every empty place my family had left behind. I heard, "Sweetheart, you were perfect." And in that moment, I realized something. Revenge had not just been about tearing them down. It had been about building us up, me and her, together, free from their shadows. They had tried to make her feel like she did not count. Now the world was proving otherwise. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she whispered, "Daddy, we don't need them, do we?" I kissed her forehead and said, "No, Emily, we never did." And with that, the chapter closed. Not with shouting or chaos, but with quiet triumph. They had lost everything they thought made them powerful, and we had gained everything they could never touch. The final line, the one that stayed with me, was not something I said out loud. It was something I felt deep in my chest as I watched my daughter drift to sleep, safe and loved. In the end, they were right about one thing: family is everything. They just never realized mine started and ended with Emily.